This is the Ballpark Digest podcast. I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strassler, joined by Kevin Reichard, the publisher, producer, writer, and everything for Ballpark Digest. As we're going through our 2021 awards, Kevin, this is an award that we're about to introduce that is very close to your heart because ballparks are your wheelhouse. Let us name the College Ballpark of the Year.
Yes, we're deep in award season, and I'm honored to announce that Florida Ballpark, home to the University of Florida baseball team, is our College Ballpark of the Year. And joining us here is the athletic director, Scott Stricklin, to discuss the ballpark, the many years of effort it took to get it built, and how it sits right now in the college baseball world. So glad to have you join us, Scott. We're really happy to see you.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it, and appreciate the recognition. We're really proud of Florida Ballpark at McKethan Field and what it provides our athletes and our fans, and look forward to it being a really important part of our campus for years to come.
Now, what are the challenges, that I think that most people outside the college baseball world don't realize is that a college ballpark these days really kind of serves two masters. On the one hand, there's the fan side, which the fans see the most, obviously. But then there's a player development side, and reconciling those two sides can be a little bit of a challenge, I imagine, Scott.
Well, you can run into some issues, especially when you are dealing with existing conditions. We were fortunate with the Florida Ballpark that we had a new piece of land that had not been developed to begin the process. We had a blank slate, and we weren't constrained by existing buildings and their footprint or anything else. We can use the whole space that we had to deal with, and so really gave us a chance. Really, the only thing we were constrained by and was simple things like sun orientation and what direction we wanted the field to face, and there's a main road we wanted, felt like it needed to be a certain place in relation to parking. But, we really had a lot of different ways to put things in place to service our student athletes from a development standpoint, whether it be their clubhouse and lounge space or hitting cages or pitching lab or anything else, coaches' offices, meeting space, and then also making sure we could take care of the fans and create a first-class experience for them when they come in the door, and we're able to really marry both of those priorities well.
And also joining us today, and forgive me, introducing Jason Michael Ford, from Populous, the architect on the project, an old friend of ours. Hey, Jason.
Kevin, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for joining us as well. This project, again, and for you as well, this is sort of marrying multiple disciplines, isn't it?
It is. I mean, again, we've had great success in the collegiate market. We've had great success pro minor league markets. And as Scott had mentioned, for us, this was really a unique opportunity, really the opportunity to put Florida baseball on the map in terms of facilities. They've got a really strong program. Prior to us starting the ballpark, they won the national championship. And so for us, again, it was just really an honor to be part of the project.
Scott, I want to go back. So I believe that the announcement that this was going to happen was made in March 2018. What was the decision-making process like leading to a new ballpark as opposed to, let's say, a renovation?
Well, it kind of goes back to what we talked about earlier when Kevin asked about how we satisfied the athlete needs and the fan needs. We had an existing stadium, McKethan Stadium, and it was in the central, kind of the center core campus. And our original plan was to do a renovation of that facility, but we had some inherent issues with that facility, along with some needs we were trying to satisfy for another project, that being a facility for our football program. So McKethan Stadium, old McKethan Stadium, was adjacent to where our football team practiced, where their practice fields were. We wanted to build a football facility that was adjacent to it, and there was another side of that practice field we were originally trying to build the football building on while we renovated McKethan, but the footprint wasn't big enough to do what we wanted to do with football. Really, the only way to satisfy the football need was the McKethan Stadium site, and the McKethan Stadium I mentioned sun orientation earlier, and that's a big deal. Obviously, being in Florida, sun is a blessing. We're the sunshine state, but sometimes shade is really nice too. And the old ballpark was oriented facing the southeast. Home plate was facing southeast, which is unusual. Typically, you want your home plate to face toward the northeast. And so, no matter what we would try to do, any kind of sunshade we would have put up at Old McKethan, would the sun would have kind of peered in underneath it and would not have been providing the what you would hope it would provide. And so that's just one small example. There are some other issues with the footprint at the old site, but really that's a long way of saying we were able to put this as part of our overall athletic master plan, and it really benefited both programs. It gave baseball in a new location, also on campus, but a different part of campus, a brand new state-of-the-art facility that was much better than any renovated McKethan Stadium would have been. And at the same time, freed up some land for us to repurpose to satisfy the needs of the football program as well. And so we were able to in one fell swoop, really make ideal situations for both those programs.
When home plate faces southeast, you can't call a lefty a southpaw. They've got to
Fair point. Never thought of that.
All right, so let's get into this. Now we've reached the start of the process. The decision has been made. A new ballpark is going to be built. And here's one priority to keep in account. Jason, I want to come right back to you. The initial steps as you remember them, as what you brought to the table as you're looking at this.
Well, I think Scott mentioned, again, predominantly that need for baseball. But I think what really struck me is that the times that we would visit University of Florida and we would go to games at McKethan is just the fact that for a sport like baseball at the University of Florida, didn't really have a front door, didn't really have that predominant presence that you see in other places. And I think for us, as Scott mentioned, having it on this new site really gave it that front door, the prominence. When you go to the ballpark, Florida ballpark at McKethan Field, you know how important baseball is at the University of Florida. So for us, as Scott said, we were all in. We knew that if we could reorient the ballpark as it is now, we could provide a lot more shade for fans. We had plenty of room, as Scott said, out on the site. It's adjacent to their lacrosse and soccer facilities. It's across the street from softball. So it really kind of starts to create this, athletic campus, if you will, just towards us at the south point of campus. But really, I think just the energy that you could build off of there, hosting regionals, hosting super regionals, we really could envision how exciting this place could be for fans.
Did you know right from the start, 360-degree concourse?
That was one of the things that we talked about. And again, I think a trend that you see in a lot of ballparks. McKethan, previously you had to walk out a portal or a vomitory to get to your concessions, to get to your restrooms. And so again, similar design or similar kind of concept we've done in other places. And I think Scott would tell you that was really important to them, that again, shade and 360 concourse, making sure that everybody could see the game from all different aspects.
And Scott, we mentioned the shade. Were there other priorities that we have not touched on yet as you're sitting down and saying, let's talk about what we want to have be a part of our new ballpark?
Just all the things you're able to do when you're starting fresh, that it's sometimes you're playing catch up on existing facilities. Point of sale count, a number of point of sale locations for concessions, having an on-site, we actually have 2 on-site kitchens in the facility to make sure that, what we're providing our fans is of a high quality, restroom facilities, make sure those are right sized. So, which those sound like little things, but really those are such an important part, especially a sport like baseball, which is such a social activity by nature. And, fans want to lock into the game, but it's not uncommon for them to get up, want to stretch their legs, walk around, check out the concessions, grab a snack. And, at the old facility, they were losing connection to the action on the field anytime they did that. And it wasn't a great experience because the facilities weren't very good. Now they have a chance to, keep that connection, hear that sound, feel like they're a part of the stadium, but at the same time have a great experience, whether it's the concessions or getting in and out of the restrooms. It's ironic. We opened it up with limited seating this past year because of COVID. And so we had about half the number of people actually attend this year than we did our last full season in the old stadium, just as a result of the limited seating. But we doubled the amount of revenue we generated from concessions. And so it just speaks to having, better infrastructure in place for that really important part of going to the ballpark, how that makes it such a more quality experience for people.
Were there aspects of the old field, McKethan, that you said, we want to bring this into Florida Ballpark?
I'm going to look at Jason. I don't recall ever having that conversation, and we had to bring something. This is not going to be anything that an architect would really focus on. But we had one chair that our seats are blue in the stadium. We had an old orange chair that was at the old park in memory of a former coach. We brought the orange chair over, and it's sitting among all the blue chairs. We have that one orange seat. That's about the only thing I think we brought from McKethan Stadium. So it's totally a new experience.
Well, that's a story in and of itself, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the interesting piece of that was, and I think Scott touched on this, is they had really good player development facilities, and all of the baseball stuff was right there at McKethan. So again, the challenge for us was maintaining that program space, maintaining the number of throwing lanes they had, hitting cages that they had, all of those things that were in McKethan that you didn't see, that made the baseball program really successful, was making sure that we allotted time and space for those. I think one of the things that people don't see that I know the coaching staff really appreciates is you can go from the hitting cage, walk under the stadium all the way over to where the pitching lab is without having to go outside. And again, just little things like that I think, from a student athlete perspective, really kind of save them time and really maximize the practice time that they have when they're there.
If you don't mind, because I've never worked with you, Jason, because I've never built a ballpark, Scott, what is that process like as you go from that design to seeing this become a reality?
There's a lot of time and effort, energy, a lot of meetings. Jason can attest to, and you start, really broad and you have fun dreaming up what you love from all your past favorite experiences going to ballparks, right? And so whether it's a 360 concourse, I can remember we pulled out, we Googled images from old Tiger Stadium and the upper deck, and there was the Reds had an old park before Crosley Field that had these really ornate arches that I remember pulling up at one point. Obviously there's a lot of limitations that you can't do that because of sight lines and everything these days in code, but just trying to get inspiration for what are really iconic ballparks of old were. And so you come up with all this programming, all the things you want to do, all the fan spaces, the berms, the outfield area that ended up being the Disney Grove, which is, we have these orange and blue Adirondack chairs and food trucks and all these things that really create a festive atmosphere in the outfield for fans, and it's really geared toward families. So you come up with all these ideas, and then you go through several iterations of kind of fine tuning those. That doesn't work like we thought it would. Let's tweak it here. How can we connect these two areas, make that more seamless? And Jason, I don't know how many meetings it was, but it's several months of meetings to finally land on a design that you feel like, okay,
Right.
This is something we can execute.
Yeah, and I think I credit Scott a lot. We've had the pleasure of working with him a couple of times, and he will text you or call you, or he'll say, "Hey, I'm thinking about this," and put it in a perspective that maybe you haven't thought of. You've been in lots of meetings with lots of people. One of those is how the ballpark looks on TV. Scott was always, for us, kind of always asking us, what's that going to look like, and shooting renderings and throughout that design process of just little vignettes and little things of what's the outfield going to feel like, what's the club going to feel like, what's the locker room going to feel like and look like. And so little pieces, I think, Scott, we started to attack this. The first thing was really capacity. And I think, again, the vision there was, we want to create a ballpark that can grow. We want to create a ballpark that can hold large crowds for rivals, for regionals, for super regionals. And that really kind of started there. The berms here, we hear from a lot of different folks, other programs, other administrators, professional teams that talk about how great the berms are at Florida Ballpark. And that, again, was something that we really wanted to emphasize into the design from a comfort level, from a Florida perspective. And I think at the end of the day, as Scott mentioned, some other inspirations, we really tried to make sure with the facilities group, with athletics, that this ballpark was in fact Florida's. And when you see the ballpark, when you experience the ballpark, I think you'd have a really hard time saying, well, this feels like somewhere else, or this feels like another ballpark I've been at. I think it genuinely feels like it belongs in Gainesville at the University of Florida.
Yeah, there were two things that I'd jump in and point out that along those lines of what Jason just said. It's so important that if you don't feel like you're just anywhere, you want to feel like you're in the state of Florida. When talking about TV shots, I remember the stadium, the structure, superstructure was in place, and they had located and poured the camera well on next to the dugouts where the TV cameras would go. And so we were asking for our TV people, our local video people, to go out and kind of give us shots of what, like, the shot of the pitcher on the mound that comes from that first base camera well would be while he's in the stretch, and they show that shot before they go to the high center field camera for the pitch. And we looked at it, and it was nothing but like there was a void of space and sky behind the back of the pitcher. There was none of the stadium being picked up in that particular shot. And the only thing you saw was power lines. And so that we made a decision to go plant some palm trees strategically in that background on top of a concourse. And so now when that shot is shown on TV, you see palm trees behind the pitcher to identify, you're in a place like Florida. And the other thing is we have a lot of exposed steel, which is not uncommon for ballparks. It's kind of an iconic trait of ballpark architecture for the last 30 years or so. But a lot of times it's painted dark green or black, and ours is all white. Again, playing off that theme of being in Florida. I think that's unique. There may be other ballparks, whether minor league ballparks or other places, that have white exposed steel infrastructure, but I don't know of many. So I think those are two things that are really a lot of palm trees, a lot of being strategic about where we place those. But then the white exposed steel, I think, is also unique to the University of Florida.
Jason, you mentioned the messages. Scott, what was the latest at night that you would send Jason a message?
I don't know if it was late at night, but I can recall I was probably watching another game on TV, and I would notice something about their backdrop or something about a camera shot that would make I wonder if we've got that right. I wonder if one of a pet peeve of mine is seeing this shot of a lot of empty seats behind home plate. And, how can we, you're going to, as Jason mentioned, we're going to have games against Florida State or Miami or in a regional or a big SEC opponent. We're just going to be packed, and we're not going to have to worry about that. But the way college baseball works, you're going to play a midweek game, and your crowd's not going to be as big on a Tuesday night against a smaller school, but that game's still going to be televised. So how can we manipulate this to make it look like, there's some energy on the screen behind home plate, because, that's such a identifiable part of watching a game. And so I would be watching a game and see a bunch of empty seats. I'm like, Jason, we're not going to have this issue. We're going to be able to avoid this, aren't we? Or here's something these people are doing. I kind of like to see how we can do that. So usually he'd send I get a screenshot or take a picture of watching a game on TV, and I'd send it to Jason, and he would have to deal with that for the next day.
I love this. How about, Scott, of all the stadiums that you have been to in person, I picture somebody leading up to their wedding, attending their friends' weddings and going, I like this, I don't like this, I like this, I don't like this. Was that you in the years leading up to this, or whatever leading up to this, going, this is an aspect I like, this is an aspect I don't like at other ballparks?
I think you probably do that naturally, just going to a lot of ballparks. And I've been in the Southeastern Conference for 3 decades, and there's been almost 2 different waves of building booms in that time. There was the initial one in the late 80s, early 90s, and then we've had another one here in the last 10 years. And seeing those trends kind of tell you a little bit too. There's probably, I think Alex Box at LSU and what Arkansas did with Baum Stadium, and they've continued to do to add on, are probably the first ones that had that open concourse kind of minor league park look. South Carolina followed suit. But probably the 2 that we got the most inspiration for, and Populous worked on both of them. One was TD Ameritrade, where they play the College World Series in Omaha, Nebraska. There are, obviously we're not on that same scale. That's a 24,000 seat facility, but there are some elements of that I think show up in the Florida ballpark. And then Jason mentioned we worked together before, and that was at the Dudy Noble Field project at Mississippi State, which is a phenomenal facility, and they have unbelievable fan support. And those 2 things combined to really make that a unique, one of a kind experience in college baseball. There were some lessons from going through that experience that I think we learned that we were able to kind of fine tune in the Florida ballpark, whether it's how we can make the concourses a little more open, eliminate some stairs in places where they may tighten or cramp up the concourses, some other things like that. But I would think those two, Duty Noble and TD Ameritrade, were probably provided a lot of context for what we were doing going through this process.
Yeah, I don't think there's a doubt the SEC is kind of the gold standard right now in college baseball ballparks. I mean, I can't think of one that's even close. You've had a lot of action in the Big Ten. I think you're going to see a lot of action out west. But overall, from top to bottom, I can't think of a college conference that's even close.
Jason, let me ask you about your lessons learned. Scott just mentioned his lessons learned. What did you bring to the table from your experience where you said, Scott, trust me on this one?
I think the biggest thing was the different, seating types that we offer at the ballpark. Something that we see, at all levels, but really not at college. You don't see that very much. And as Scott mentioned, McKethan earlier, McKethan had, chair back seats. I think we had some benches, and that was sort of it. One of the things, and Scott's done this at other projects in Florida, where he said, we're not going to have any bench seats. We're going all chair backs because that's important that we want to maintain that. But we've also got 4 top seats. We've got berm seating. We've got club seats at the facility. So just an array of different seating types. He mentioned the Disney Grove in the outfield, which I think has widely been successful in terms of, again, they bring in food trucks. They have an outfield bar out there. People can kind of just leisurely sit out with the palm trees. You can see through the outfield fence. People can be right up against there. And I think, again, as I watch games, I've been to a couple games at Florida Ballpark, but watch them on TV quite a bit. You just can put yourself in those folks and those fans in terms of what their experience is going to be in those seats. And as Scott said, you get up and walk around, you can get a different experience every couple of innings in this ballpark, which I think, again, we talked at great lengths about how many different seating types and different experiences we were going to have in the ballpark.
I want to transition away from the fans. And I believe that the pre-Crossley field for the Reds, I believe that was called the Palace of the Fans.
Palace of the Fans, yes.
There's everything that we see on TV. There's the fan experience in person. Can the two of you take us through everything that the fans don't see? That kind of detail, that process.
Well, I really, that focuses on what our team uses, I think we did a really good job with the adjacencies. You want to make that as efficient a use of space as possible. You don't want to necessarily, we have plenty of space. So when I say efficient, I don't mean we're trying to cut corners. I mean, we just want we want to set it up in a way where their time can be used really efficiently. And Jason mentioned earlier, the fact that you can go from one end of the grandstand underneath where the player level is to the other end, have usable space without ever having to go outside. And we have great weather, so usually going outside is not a problem. But if you have a day where it's raining or for whatever reason, the players can still be really effective with their team spaces. It was interesting. One of the things that, a lot of times these clubhouses, we have a players lounge and we have a clubhouse, we have a locker room. And a lot of times in major league facilities and other facilities, they'll combine those two spaces and make it one really big open spaces where the lockers are there, but also the kind of the lounge setting. And it was really important to our coach, Kevin O'Sullivan. He wanted the locker room to be separate because he wanted the players out of the locker room into the lounge space as much as possible. And so we took some steps to open up the lounge to make it more of an inviting space. And the locker room is it's very nice, but more functional, right? Get in, then come back out for your food, for the TV, for the entertainment, for the social pieces. When you're not down the hall in the batting cage or you're doing something team-wise, there's going to be, because you think about the life or the day in the life of a student athlete, where you have class in the morning, and then you show up at the ballpark, and there's that transition time when you're coming in. You may be grabbing something to eat, getting changed, preparing to practice, have a practice, and then there's that transition time on the back end, or you get cleaned up. You may have a meal again. You may have some social time with your guys before you go do study or whatever you're doing that night. And so I think the facility really does a good job of that. With the way the locker room, the player lounge, the other player amenities, the team meeting room are all laid out.
Yeah, and there's, a practice field was also part of this project. So they have a full infield turf practice field just right outside where the batting cages are. So I would echo that. And Scott mentioned the lounge and the locker room. I remember early in the design, we literally had a corridor kind of separating the lounge and the locker room. And Scott looked at me and he said, "Do we need this wall here? Like, why can't we just open this entire thing up?" And, so from a design standpoint, we had a change in how the ceiling works, and the ceiling sort of defines the edge of where that lounge is. But again, I would credit Scott because he was the one that kind of came into the meeting and probably took a pen out of my hand and, scribbled the wall away and said, "Could we get rid of this wall?" And when you walk in from a player standpoint, that's the first place you land is the lounge, which has the Gatorade refueling station off of it. I mean, just a really nice large space. It's got lots of windows, again, natural light. The players can rest in there and not have to change while someone else is eating or change while someone's playing table tennis or pool. So, I mean, it's a really nice, comforting space for them.
Scott, is it too soon to say, all right, when you're down, Florida Ballpark is open? What's next for ballpark upgrades?
Well, ironically, it's not. We're actually, as I mentioned, we had our first season last year, albeit during COVID. We actually have that Disney Grove area in the outfield. We had in the initial plan, we had to value engineer it out, a concession restroom facility behind the batter's eye, to be back there where the fans are, where the food trucks and everything else is, kind of a bit of a beer garden. And we're this off season, we're putting that facility in to really kind of complete that space and really give it a sense of permanency out there. So, I get real fidgety at ball games, and so I'm enjoying the action. But between innings, I'm always looking around and what do we need to do? What's the next? Whether it's a new seating type, is there an area we need to repurpose? Did we get this right on the design, or are fans using it the way we intended, or is there really a better use for it? And I would think that there's going to be, in addition to what we're doing out in the Disney Grove this off season, there'll be continual tweakings with new seating ideas, and I'm so excited for this coming season where we can have full capacity crowds to see how our fans, their fans are going to tell us a lot about how they want to use the ballpark. I know that they really like it and they're going to love it when it's crowded, when it's packed. But how they interact with that is going to tell us a lot about what needs to be our next steps.
Kevin, I know that you are a small picture person in terms of all of those small details that make a ballpark so great, but you're also a big picture person. I know you were wondering about baseball within the realm of greater college athletics, right?
Yeah, obviously 25 years ago, Scott was alluding to the two waves of ballparks in the SEC. Baseball, kind of was the sore neglected, stepchild on campus. And now you're seeing a lot of major schools putting major money into the facilities. And Scott, you've been around long enough to have seen this transition. What's your feeling on it, applying to the rest of college sports and how it bodes for the future?
College baseball has had a foothold in the South probably since the mid 80s. And you mentioned the SEC. There's no question there's a lot of passion in this part of the country for that sport. And part of it is the region in this region, there's a lot of passion about everything our universities do. There's not a lot of pro sports. And so our population base really, gravitates to whatever their university of choice is doing at that time. So football is obviously king, but basketball's big. And then in springtime, it's natural to look for sports like baseball and softball being outlets for fans to attach their passions. And baseball has made so much sense, and I think has been such an easy transition or growth for that sport of college baseball, because it combines two things that the culture understands. One is the sport of baseball, right? It's been around for over 100 years, 150 years, and people understand that sport very well, and they understand the Gators, or they understand Alabama or Tennessee or LSU, whatever the school is. And so it's a very natural connection for fans to feel like that, have a passion for, and feel like that's something that's important and worth supporting. And so I don't think there's a reason why the SEC schools typically dominate the top 10 in attendance in college baseball. The weather's nice, and the schools have really invested in the facilities, and it's made for a really unique culture. I mean, it is, as I said, football is king. But in May and June, when postseason time is ramping up and NCAA regionals and super regionals leading up to the College World Series, if your school is in that mix playing for something important, there's a tremendous amount of passion, and these facilities, these stadiums like the Florida Ballpark, really they are showcased during that time at a high level. And it's why we invest all the money into it, because the payoff is when you have a nice June night and there's 10,000 people and you're on national TV playing one game to go to the College World Series. That's a pretty special environment.
Yeah, Kevin, I think too, and the trends, college baseball really has been getting a lot better in terms of the talent level. I think a lot more high school athletes are going the college route than they ever have before. And part of that is the development that they can get in the 1 year or 3 years that they're in college. So we've seen that trend really across the country, but specifically in the Southeast Conference, that these student athletes are going to college now instead of going to the minors for 1 or 2 or 3 years. And really, Florida's done a great job. There's a couple guys in the Royals farm system. Brady Singer is one who could have gone to the minor leagues right out of high school, went to Florida, and really did a smart financial move by doing that from a development standpoint. And then I'd also say he got a couple of years of college education as part of that as well, which is something you can't look down on.
Kevin, I have one more question for me personally to ask to each of our guests. So I yield to you.
I don't know whether I have a whole lot more to say, because I've been really enjoying this conversation and listening to the both of you talk about college baseball. And it as someone who's been around this industry for a while, it's really great to see that college baseball is finally getting the attention it deserves. And like I said, SEC is by far the top conference. I think you're going to see, especially on the West Coast, you're going to see a bunch of facilities coming up. And in the North's always a challenge, but the East has been seeing some great new facilities pop up as well. Do you see this trend continuing for the next 10 years, or are we going to see it kind of level off?
I'll let Jason answer the market piece, because he's in the middle of knowing who's out there and who's having conversations. I will point out that in 2019, so 2 years ago, Michigan played in the final series of the College World Series, and there's been a trend of more and more teams from the upper Midwest and the Northeast being competitive late in the postseason, which tells you that there's more and more emphasis being placed. It's becoming less of a regional sport, more of a national sport.
Yeah, and I think, Kevin, to your question, Scott kind of mentioned it. We're working with a couple other SEC schools right now, oddly enough, that have had renovations within the last 10 years that are looking around, and they're looking at what Florida is doing, what others are doing. And, it comes down to recruiting, right? And it comes down to how those things are being laid out there. I don't know. I think the NIL is actually going to have a greater impact on college baseball at some of these schools than it might at football. But I'm not in that realm yet. But I think there's a lot of these schools that are again trying to keep up with the Floridas, if you will, now that they've got a brand new ballpark. I think of the 14 SEC schools, I think 10 have been done in the last 10 years or had a major renovation. And so, it's hard to fathom that. I think looking at Vanderbilt or looking at South Carolina that Scott mentioned, those are kind of two of the older ballparks in the SEC now, which are really nice places to watch a ball game.
Scott, my final question for you. I'm going back to the original announcement, or I'm seeing this from floridagators.com, and just your quote starts off with this, quote unquote, "You get one chance to build these types of facilities." All right. How'd your one chance go now that you're looking at Florida Ballpark?
Well, we're incredibly proud of what it represents. And it's really fulfilling standing on a concourse during a game and having people walk up to you and just start rattling off all the things they like about the new ballpark, right? That's a pretty fulfilling moment right there. And when people thank you for this being a reality, And so that right there is if you get one of those, it tells you it's worth it. So I would say that it's been a smashing success, and can't wait to watch the Gators win a lot of games in the years to come in front of really happy fans.
And Jason, simply a question to you as an architect, because I'm going to assume, I could be wrong, your ballparks each has its own special place in your heart and in your memory. What does Florida Ballpark mean to you?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to really being a game changer. And I know we use that word a lot. But what it represents, I think, for the university and for the baseball program, again, McKethan was one of those where you would go to it and people might say it wasn't a great ballpark. You can find great things in those ballparks. And so I don't think McKethan was as bad as people say. Now, again, in a, late May, early June, I'm sure it was really hot there. Now that we have shade at the ballpark, I think people are really happy. But I think just the fact that, when you drive down Museum Drive or Hull Road and you come across the ballpark, I think really the scale of the ballpark, the importance that the ballpark shows of how much baseball means, how much athletics means at the University of Florida. I think that's sort of the takeaway, that it's a really nice ballpark in a really good location and just shows off the program like it deserves to be shown off.
Kevin Reichard, your thoughts?
My thoughts are congratulations, Scott, on a great accomplishment. And again, our award this year, we're very honored to be presenting it to such a fine project, quite honestly.
Well, we're really humbled and appreciative, and appreciate you guys giving us the recognition here at the University of Florida.
Well, we will see you next spring. I didn't make it down because of COVID, obviously, but man, I can't wait. I think I'll begin my baseball year next year at your ballpark.
We'd love to have you. Come on down.
And on that note, for Scott Stricklin, Athletic Director, University of Florida, and Jason Michael Ford, Populous, and Kevin Reichard of Ballpark Digest, I'm Jesse Goldberg-Strassler, and this has been the Ballpark Digest podcast.